say it means over here, it means a temporal period of time when Jesus said, at the end of the age, the harvesters will come and weed out in Matthew 13, end of the age. I thought that was the end of eternity. What? Weed out the iniquitous people from his kingdom. What are you talking about? I thought it meant eternity. Well, it means here, it means the age of his. Okay, they want to just oppose whatever they want it to mean based on the flow of the context that fits their theology. I don't read. No, you just don't take words grammatically that have definitions and make them fit your narrative because of themselves. Otherwise, they put a monkey wrench into your mindset. Well, maybe your mindset's wrong. Maybe your understanding's wrong. You ever think of that? But no, they can't even have the humbleness to think that way. They're too arrogant. They're too trusting. And well, the forefathers and all the people. Where is your reference to God and His Word when you start justifying what you believe? When you start justifying what you believe with the forefathers and the theology and the people that teach it, if that's where you first go to, I'd ask you to check yourself. Check yourself. Well, who do you really trust then for what you believe about God? People's comments about Him or God and His Word? Because we say that's what we do, but we don't do that when we're pressed. When we're pressed on what you believe, it always goes back to what my pastor said or what this institution said or the men of old and women of old have said. I understand that, but why is your not first go to the gold standard? Bible, God's Word. God Himself. Why doesn't He matter what He says? Why is that trivial and not? Why? It's like the Constitution. When a lawyer goes to court, he wants the Constitution on his side. He wants statutes and ordinances in previous cases. He or she wants those previous case studies and ordinances and statutes and Constitution on their side. Not what the majority of people in the street believe. Not what the folks in the community think happened. They want statutes, ordinances, case law, Constitution on their side. That's how you win a case. How you win your case before God, if you're right or wrong, is based on where did you base your thinking on? On what the crowd says, what the neighborhood of theology says, what the history of the community has said in Christianity, or what God's Word has said. Because that's your Constitution. That's your proof text. It is by far being devalued and not really seen as what it should be. So, the book of Daniel. Book of Daniel, we talked about that, and one of the takeaways we saw is that God ordained the whole thing. To have Jerusalem handed over to Nebuchadnezzar. He starts the book off by saying God said He set this time aside, He appointed it so that they'd be handed over to Nebuchadnezzar. Like, oh goodness gracious. Then we find out, unbeknownst to us, that I didn't know this, and we talked about how the Hebrew children, again, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, along with Daniel, were four among many Hebrew children. But they were the ones who had this sukathuno, wisdom, that had this ability to have a depth of insight and understanding. Interesting. But among them all having this, only Daniel had this skillful wisdom, this excellent spirit. He had this ability that God gave him to understand dreams and visions. So they all shared sukathuno, insight, depth of wisdom, and introspection, and seeing themselves for what God was teaching at 13. But Daniel had that and more. He had a skillful wisdom. He had an excellent spirit. He had the ability to God to show him understanding of dreams and visions even before he was told what they were by the person. God told him. He was like, that is insane. Then we learn also in chapter 1 that there was a 3-year Chaldean school he had to go through to learn Chaldean and to understand it. Then we learn at the end of chapter 1, it's a summation of what's about to then be expounded upon in chapter 2 when Nebuchadnezzar had his dream. And he got upset, and he was angry and restless that night. He called for all of them to be killed. And then he has his general of his guard, who was a bloodthirsty, testosterone man of all men. Think about this, because God told Nebuchadnezzar, of all kings, you're the king. And when you're that, you answer to no one on this earth. Which means your captain of your guard answers also to no one but you. So why would he stop to listen to a 16-year-old boy, young man, in Daniel? Profound. We overlook that sometimes. I did. Until you read it and you go, what the heck is going on? God gripped his heart. General of the guard. God grips him and stops him in his tracks. And before that, we find out what happened before this. When Daniel in chapter 1, what happens? Daniel tells Ashpenaz and Melzar, hey, you know what? Give me 10 days to show you. That was the first earmark that he was different. When Ashpenaz goes, you don't know what you're asking for. I can't do that. But Melzar, who was under Ashpenaz, says, tell you what, I'll do what you're asking. And after 10 days of not eating or drinking, but eating of the root, the fruit that grow above the ground, not on the ground or in the ground, but above the ground. So foods that grow above the ground, he ate those and did not drink of the king's wine and drink or of his food, ate the food only above the ground and had water. You have this idea that all of a sudden, 10 days later, they were like healthier than the others, right? And that 10-day testing and vetting convinced Melzar, the rest of the 3 years, I'm going to allow you to also have this dietary process that, because now I don't mind breaking the rules if I know the results are going to vindicate me, right? So Daniel's already showing us in the beginning, he already had 3 years of seeing God in his life intervene by saying, I can go against the flow of man by showing them the results are worth it. So here we are when he's confronted with the general of Nebuchadnezzar, and he confronts him, and he just asks him, why the harsh decree? The fact that he even stopped listening to begin with, it was like as if God prompted in his heart and in his mind, he stopped him from his testosterone, blood-thirsty laden. He already killed people already. He already put houses on fire. And yet he stopped in his tracks. And he said, listens to Daniel, a 16-year-old boy. It's just unbelievable that he would do that. He didn't do it on his own. God did that. Actually, don't think for a minute why it is that that was God. That Daniel didn't see that. Daniel knew that. And why the fruit above the ground? That's what pulse means. So the pulse that he ate, why the fruit above the ground? Again, I think it speaks to that which is it's up above. So it grows, speaking of his deeper wisdom and skillful understanding that he had. So I think the pulse, fruit in the ground and on the ground, speaks to the sporos fruits leading up to 100-fold. Whereas fruit above the ground, I think it speaks to those that's built upon. I think it speaks to that imagery of the typology of the 30, 60, 100, that Daniel had this skillful wisdom and skillful spirit, excellent spirit about him. That's why I think it's above the ground. But then we had this general stopping in his tracks. It wasn't of his own mindset. And you can think that Daniel must have been like, oh yeah, I've seen this before 3 years earlier with Melzar. God did the same thing. And now he's stopping Arioch right in his tracks. Same thing. He's like, this is craziness. And so Daniel then, he goes the next step and says, can I have an audience with the king? And he's like, yeah, sure. And then what's really crazy, Nebuchadnezzar was so fuming earlier by asking 3 times the previous Yahoos give him an answer. They wouldn't. And it just made him so angry. He said, kill them all. And he was already killing and burning their houses. And then he stops to talk to Daniel. And Daniel says, give me an audience for the king. And that's not awesome enough that God stopped this general's actions and thoughts and made him listen to Daniel. But on top of that, he then changed Nebuchadnezzar's heart, because Nebuchadnezzar was furiously fuming with anger to want to kill and see them pay the price of insolence. And yet, Nebuchadnezzar had to wait. He waited to the next day. Again, profound. Profound. God changed the heart and actions of Arioch to wait, to stop and listen, then to act on the words of Daniel. And also changed the heart and mind of Nebuchadnezzar, which God clearly said, no one can do that but him. So God did that to both of these men. For what reason? On the bequest to save Daniel and his friends. His 3 Hebrew children. It's unbelievable. The three Hebrew children, his other friends. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And what's Daniel first he does? As soon as he says, okay, I'm going to honor your request, Nebuchadnezzar stays his hand and waits the next. How does he wait the next day when he's the king who's already had a bad night's sleep? He's angry beyond belief, to the point that he reacted with saying, murder them all and burn their houses. It was already being carried out. And God stopped that thought process, that mental state, that emotional state, that king's decree. That's not an act of God? Yeah, it is. Why else would he stop? There's no other reason. There's no 16-year-old kid anywhere that's going to make you stop when you are the king of all kings of men and you are the general of the army. You don't listen to a 16-year-old young man unless God makes you. God made him listen, and God made Nebuchadnezzar change his mind and heart. It's just amazing that they themselves didn't see that for what it was. But Daniel saw it for what it was, and right away, what's his first reaction? He goes to his 3 friends and says, pray for me that I understand what it means. He asked for the audience with the Nebuchadnezzar before he even knew the answer. He trusted God for the answer before he even asked God for the answer. It's unbelievable. He trusted God for a solution to a problem he hadn't even brought to God before. It's wild. It's wild. It shows you how mature and how courageous, how steadfast, how established he was in his faith. He had to even ask God the question. He already knew that his petitioning before God, his already current spiritual walk with God, that God would have a respect for the things that are on his heart, the things that he wanted to have insight to spare for the purpose of his life and his friend's lives. And so sure enough, God gave him the answer. And what's the first reaction Daniel does? He starts praising God, thanking God. Doesn't say I deserved it. Doesn't say, figures, I've already shown 3 years that I'm worth your loving on me. You need me. That's not what he said. He didn't say you need me. He didn't say I deserve this. He didn't say, I was waiting for you to do what you're supposed to do anyways. You owe it to me, God. No, none of that. Daniel was like, thanks. I didn't need to. I don't know why you honored me like this, why you have loved on me like this. I don't know why you continue to show favor on me, but thank you so much. Daniel was humble. He was grateful. He was courageous. He was spiritually adept. At 16, he walks in a measure of faith that most men that are 66, 76, 56, 55 don't walk like. He's a 16-year-old young man walking with like a giant in the faith. Unbelievable. Goes to Nebuchadnezzar, tells him about his dream. Before he even know what the dream, he tells Nebuchadnezzar what the dream was and what it meant. He's so enthralled by it. Nebuchadnezzar says, oh my gosh, you are embodying two things. You're embodying the trustworthiness, the purity of the truth of God, and you're embodying the wisdom of God. You're not just showing wisdom from God. You're embodying God's wisdom himself. And you're embodying God's trustworthiness like in physical form, like this whole purity of trust. Everything out of your mouth is ringing true. Everything, how you're saying it, what you're saying, how you're presenting it, and the wisdom from which you know this. It's like I'm talking to God himself as an emissary on behalf of God himself. So what's he do? He worships Daniel. Holy Toledo. And he gives gifts to Daniel. Not because he wants to worship him as a god. He wants to worship Daniel as what he thinks is a representation of God being manifest before him in the person of Daniel. So Daniel receives those gifts, but then asks in return, as you put me over all of Babylon, hey, put my 3 friends in a good station. So they're above boots on the ground. They're over like boots on the ground, if you will, like lower level people along the streets of Babylon, whereas Daniel's overseeing the whole kingdom. And so we fast forward chapter 3, and now it's 19 years later from chapter 1, and now we're at 586 BC, and now we're at the point of the last wave of Babylonian captivity. And of course he's overseeing that. He's overseeing that. That's why he wasn't there in chapter 3. And what does the Yahweh Nebuchadnezzar do? There he is now. So it's 19 years from chapter 1. It's 16 years from the events of what happened in chapter 2, which expounded on the event of the last part of chapter 1's couple verses, was a statement of fact that chapter 2 expounded on. In chapter 1, statement of fact, last couple of verses, chapter 2 expounds on what happened. And then all of a sudden now in chapter 3, it's been 16 years from that interaction Daniel had with Nebuchadnezzar, and he acts like it never happened. And why is that important to know? Because 16 years later is interesting to note, because 8 is God's number for resurrection and renewal, new beginnings, and 2 is God's number for testimony and division. And God was testifying and witnessing to us and putting division between us to let us know that he gave Nebuchadnezzar a new beginning, another time. And what's he doing with it? He's making it all about himself. The old adage, some people never learn. That's the lesson from Daniel 1 through 5 so far, is that men of great stature, of great responsibility, given great blessings by God, they just don't learn. They don't listen, no matter how many chances they get. God gave him 2 chances of renewal beginning. He didn't get it. We're about to see a second chance he's going to give him here. Puts up the idol, worships himself, tries to mimic the image that Daniel talked about. He wants to build up the image. He builds it up, and he says, hey, at the sound of the music, you're going to vow, you're going to kowtow, and immediately if you don't, you're going to be judged in the fire. And then, of course, the Chaldean people that are revengeful against the 3 Hebrew children, instead of being thankful, they spared their lives. Because remember, 16 years earlier, their friends were already murdered and their houses burned, and they were en route to be likewise. And because of Daniel and the 3 friends praying for him, all their lives were spared. So instead of showing gratitude, humility, and gratefulness and thankfulness, oh no, they were upstaged because they had been there longer than them. They knew better than them. They're just lowly Jews, lowly Hebrews. So because they couldn't get over the animus of discrimination, of bigotry, Who cares what your loving, graceful kindness? I don't care if you're black, white, or orange, male or female, if you speak English, Chinese, Cantonese, Lebanese. I don't care what you speak. You're showing love and kindness to me, and you help me from a life-threatening situation or my loved ones. I'm going to say thank you to you. I'm going to appreciate you. I don't care if you're gay or straight or Muslim or Jew. I'm going to show thankfulness to you and appreciation for you for helping me. That God used you to help in my situation. But not these yahoos. These people were angry, and their arrogance and their jealousness and their bitterness and their narcissistic mentality of just self-absorption. 16 years they've been brewing on it, waiting for a day to pounce. And now the day has come. So they go to the king and say, hey, look, the 3 children, they aren't bound to the idol. Matter of fact, not to others do likewise. Go get them. So what's the king do? He goes against what he said. He said immediately, you go into the fire. He calls them in front of him to reason with them, showing you he has a little bit of pause. I do remember how God used y'all in the background praying for your friend Daniel. He was demonstrative in my life about the image. We're 16 years later, but I do remember y'all played a role because I had to promote you. So can I reason with you first, because you're an extension of the guy that I was profoundly respecting and valuing what God did in his life. So what gives? Am I hearing the right thing here? Like why are you not listening to me? He's trying to reason with them. He didn't stop after one time. He tried to do it multiple times. I love verse 17 and 18, chapter 3, when they say basically, I don't care if God kills us, and I don't care if God sustains our life in the fire. What you're not going to do is tell me to serve and worship that image. Ain't going to happen. That's what you're not going to do. And he gets all mad. Make it 7 times hotter. People putting them in there died from the flames coming out and consuming them. But yet they lived just fine. Matter of fact, Septuagint adds to us, they took a knee and started singing. Now, Heather goes, holy good morning. What's going on? Right? And then from there, he has his second renewal, the 16 years speaking to this point. Reminder, oh, that's right, there's the God of Israel outside of me thinking I'm a God and I'm all that in a bag of chips. He started, oh, that's right, the Daniel God that these guys in the background prayed for 16 years earlier is reminding me again, I'm being an idiot right now. Okay, so he remembers that. Then chapter 4 picks up him reflecting on this over his many years of being a king. He was a king for, 39 years? 43 years, excuse me. 43 years he reigned as king. Last 11 years he starts to reflect back and think back at that vision that Daniel also told him about, which he didn't talk about in chapter 2. Daniel talked about the dream and visions, but only explained to him the dream, which was the image. Gold, silver, copper, bronze, iron, clay. Clay and iron, iron and clay, So he goes, okay, then he goes into the tree. And the tree grew and all this, and then he starts going into that, and that's the vision that he was reflecting back on, thinking, look how far I've come from the image that Daniel told me I was. I have become this tree. I have grown large. He's kind of feeling himself, as they say in today's nomenclature and our millennial talk. But he's feeling himself. He's just reading his own press clippings like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good, Yeah, I'm all that. And all of a sudden, 12 months later, God goes, wham, puts him into a beast. Can't walk, can't talk, has to poop on himself, pee on himself, live like an animal for 7 years. Then he comes back to being a real person again, able to walk and talk and eat and be hygienic about himself and participate in the things of human beings. And what happens? What did he say? The very last part of chapter 4, he said, oh my gosh. And where God says, one of my favorite verses in Daniel 4:35, I can just read it for. I love this verse. Daniel, it's one of my life verses of the Old Testament. It's one of my favorite verses of the Old Testament. Daniel 4:35. And the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he does according to his will, as the armies of the heavens, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what doest thou? I love that. I just love when God peacocks about how awesome his sovereignty is, and we got nothing to say about it. I love it. I love that. So that's Daniel 4:35, and Nebuchadnezzar is knowing this, and then he ends up by saying he's a king of heaven. He can abase what he wants to abase, exalt he wants to exalt. He's all that. And then based on Greek literature and Jewish literature of extra-curricular biblical understanding, we find out that they both claim he died between 1 year and 2 years after that. So therefore, Belshazzar was at 11 years old when he saw his daddy go from a man to a beast. He was 18 years old when he got restored Belshazzar began to reign at 27 years old in chapter 5. This is our review of last year. And what does Yahu Dilwe do? Does he reflect on anything at all that God did in his dad's life? Butkus. Zero. He does even worse than his dad. His dad made an idol. What's he do? He takes the vessels from the temple of gold, silver, and copper, and stone, and wood, and he says, I'm going to worship all of those as my gods. Holy Toledo. You're taking the things that were used as vessels to worship God and saying the vessels themselves are your gods. Are you insane? And his mom is like, your father, your father, your father, in chapter 5, verse 11. As if to remind him, you're being an idiot. You're being an idiot. You're being an idiot. Did you not reflect at all on the lessons learned in your dad's life? Good or bad or indifferent? Because you don't understand my dad. My dad was mean and ugly and disgusting to me. My dad was loving, but he wasn't really there for me. Well, just please, stop. Did your dad live and breathe? Did you have a chance to remember reflections of your dad at all as a kid growing up from childhood to an adult life? If you did, I don't care if it's good or bad or indifferent. There is something in that experience that God has given for you to glean from. And if you turn a deaf ear and a blind eye because you're being a useful idiot to Satan, that's what you're doing. I don't care if he treated you ugly or treated you lovingly or somewhere in between. There's lessons to be learned and gleaned from how you and your dad got along or didn't get along. God worked in and through his life to teach you something. And your mom too. So you better glean from that. And stop rejecting it or denying it or putting a blind eye to it. All you're doing is playing into the hands of Satan. You're being a useful idiot. God chose our path in this world through our DNA code of our parents. We didn't choose our parents. They didn't choose us either. And God put us in the blueprint I see this world through the lens of our family unit. So go back and glean. Belshazzar took none of that stock in mind. From 11 years old to 18, saw his dad go through it. 9 years later, begins to reign, and he reigned for 14 years, not thinking a hill of beans about what his dad had been teaching him as God taught lessons to his dad. He could have gleaned much insight. But he was too arrogant, self-absorbed, narcissistic, all about the money, all about the power, all about the free sex and free women, all that garbage. If there was cocaine and drugs back then, I'm sure he was sniffing it and smoking it. The dude didn't care. It was about, I care nothing but a good time. That's all he cared about. That's all he cared about. Until it wasn't funny no more. Until a hand came in, wrote on the wall, Meeny, meeny, tika you parson. Waiting, found, liking. And it should have said, sucker. That's what it should have said. If I was God, if I wanted to flaunt a little bit, I'd say, meeny, meeny, tika you parson. Sucker. As if to say, it's over. The jig is up. But that was enough for God to say that. Meeny, meeny, tika you parson. You've been waiting, found, lacking. That's God's way of saying, look in the mirror, you suck. Wait, what? No, I'm king. No. Yeah, you die tonight. Tonight. Wait, what? Yeah. And then what's he say? Oh, the mother goes, go to Daniel, the skillful one. What's he say? Oh, I've heard of him. Heard of him? You complete horse's ass. You knew who he was from 11 years old to 41. 30 years. What a coincidence. The number of maturity. When he knew his dad was a beast, to the day he then realized his life's about to end. 30 years had gone by. It shows his immaturity when God expected to have maturity from the lessons learned from his daddy and then have access to counsel and wisdom of Daniel. He refused both. He refused to reflect on the lessons learned from his dad, and he refused the counsel and wisdom of Daniel, who he had right available to him the entire time in the midst of his kingdom. But what's he do? Well, it's never too late. It's never too late. Sometimes it is. Never too late in the general sense, yeah, but sometimes it is when you act like that. He thought he was just abusing and circumventing and exploiting God's love and grace and mercy, and he calls in Daniel. Then he goes, you don't understand. You knew. We read that, remember, verse 22. You knew. Your life ends tonight. Like, it's over. Sure enough, that night, gone. Just like that. It's like, so chapter 5 of Daniel was got finished in the reflection of what 2024. We're going to pick up chapter 6 next week. But it ends with this whole idea of Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar are both two peas in a pod. They both got stiff-necked and dull of hearing of what God was saying to them. With Nebuchadnezzar, God gave 2 chances through Daniel and then through the Hebrew children to reconcile him, to remember the truth of how the power of God can enlighten him to worship and serve the right God. And he went wrong. After each interaction with Daniel, he went off the apple cart. He went back to his own selfish, arrogant ways, sacrilegious ways. Then he got back in the righteousness again after Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, Meshach and Abednego approached him. And then all of a sudden he goes off the reservation again and gets all pious again. And God makes him into a beast. But it gets restored a third time. This third time, to his credit, he ends his life, which is a marred life of a lot of bad but a little bit of good moments. He ends on a good note. And he tells his son, you got to remember, that he's the king of heaven. He can obey so he wants and exalt who he wants. But it just goes to show you that a father's testimony, a father's legacy, more is caught than taught. More is caught than taught. You say, it doesn't matter what he said. Did it? No. Belshazzar was like, la 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 la. Dude was 20 years old roughly. 18 when his dad got restored, about 20 when his dad died. And 7 years later he came to reign. Did he act like he listened to anything his dad said? Because he more was caught than taught. He repeated more of what he saw than what he heard. So, no offense to Nebuchadnezzar, but that's the legacy you left for your son, dude. You had a life that was just unfortunately marred with lots of things off the rails: disobedience, self-absorbed, arrogance, piousness, self-righteousness, narcissistic attitude. A couple drops here and there with God moving in your life, but the dominant scale was, let's face it, 90% all about yourself. You wonder why your son was 100% about himself? Apple didn't fall far from the tree, now did it? And so what the consequence is, the sons of the father came to visit that son, didn't they? And look where it got his son. His son, for 30 years, from the first time he saw God demonstrably judge his daddy, to him now coming to the end of his life, the son now, 30 years later, he has to now, I'm sure at 41 years of age, Belshazzar is flashing back 30 years earlier going, oh my gosh, can you make me into a beast instead of taking my life? Doesn't work that way. That was a warning shot across the bow, so you wouldn't have to have your life be taken tonight. Since you didn't listen and you didn't learn, you die tonight. And that's going to happen to a lot of people. A lot of folks have a father and a mother they don't learn from, and that's how it is. It's just one of those things, It's one of those things where you just have to know that. In Belshazzar's case, it came too late. Nebuchadnezzar learned at the end. He died in a good note. Unfortunately, the damage was done to his son. And his son died in a bad note. And that happens to a lot of dads I've seen through the years. They want to correct their wrongs, but there's so much wrong that the little right they do, their sons are just, they hold them in prison to the actions they can't ever live down. And then the father gets demoralized and depressed by it. Don't let that discourage you. You as a dad, you still lead the right way. You go out the right way. Nebuchadnezzar did. Went out the right way. But of course, if he could see his son, what his reactions were years later, he'd probably be saddened and distraught, of course. But you can't blame Nebuchadnezzar for that. It's his fault that his son took from what he is example, but his son also had enough example to not repeat the faults of his father. So his father is some of the reasonings by, but it's not his fault. The son is the reason. The son ignored the last message his father gave, and the son decided to look at the dominant actions of his father, because his father's life made it difficult for his son to learn the lessons. But his son chose to take the easy way, the less courageous way, and honor his father through the whole gamut of his life actions, and see how he ended his life on a good note. He could have taken that whole fruition into mind and honored his father differently, but he chose to honor the bad things about his father, use as an excuse to live the way he lived. And that's the legacy that Nebuchadnezzar has to live with, because they both are true. He led a bad example, but he also left as a good example. But unfortunately, the son spurned how he left and embraced the overall message, how he lived. And that's what you saw in Belshazzar. And it's sad. And then chapter 6 picks up. We're going to pick it up on Sunday. But those are the reflections we had from 2024. So let's close and pray, and we'll reconvene on next Sunday. So, Father, thank you so much for the time we have today. Thank you for all your love and what you give to us and provide to us. Help us continue to learn and grow in you and your words. We embark on a new year, 2025. Thank you so much for all that you are to us and all that you continue to give us to learn and grow from. Never help us to become complacent. Help us to be like Nebuchadnezzar in a way that overlooking all the sins and failures of our lives, but never giving up on knowing we can still end right. Help us not to be like Belshazzar and embrace the things of our past that we can cling to and justify. Well, that's the dominant thing that I remember. I'm going to repeat that. Let us look at those rare moments where those other moments. They may be sparse, but they're there. Where your love was there, your provision was there, the message of understanding was there. And help us to cling to those moments that are against the grain of our human nature, to be thankful for you, to be grateful for what you've done. We may not see it all the time through a rough, abusive home life or a rough life getting up to this point in our life, but help us to teach our children and our grandchildren likewise, to take stock in lessons learned. None of us are perfect. None of us lead an upward tick. We all have valleys and peaks, but help us to recognize your will in our life, your hand in our life, and through it all. Don't wait too long before we engage in the wisdom and counsel of you. Because if it's too late to turn the corner. Hope that's not the case for us, our children, our grandchildren, our children's children's children. Help us to continue to lead by example and make ourselves exit this world the right way and cling to the wisdom and counsel we have every moment we have, because we never know what day will be our last. We thank you for all you do for us. In Jesus, Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.